Hey, Waffle Gang. I hope that you're doing great today. My name is Jimsy, and today we're back checking out some more Reddit stories.
I'm Mark. I'm 32 years old, and at my own brother's dinner party, his wife slapped me across the face in front of a dozen people and called me a disgusting man. My brother's response? He told me to apologize to her or get out. Before I tell you about the shocking surprise that was waiting for them when they got home, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. The whole thing happened last Thanksgiving. It was at my older brother James's house, or more accurately, his wife Victoria's house. It was a mansion, really, one of those sprawling, sterile places in an exclusive gated community where the lawns are unnaturally green and every hedge is trimmed to geometric perfection. The kind of place that's designed to impress, not to feel like a home. I always felt like an alien there, a foreign body invading a pristine, controlled environment. I'd always felt like an outsider there, a bug under a microscope. James and I used to be close, back when we were just kids sharing a cramped bedroom, dreaming of getting out of our small town. I went into software engineering, built my own company from the ground up with nothing but instant noodles and a belief in my own code. James became a corporate lawyer and hit the jackpot when he married Victoria Blackwood. Her family's name was on buildings, on charity wings, on the lips of every important person in the state. Since then, our paths had diverged so much it felt like we were living in different universes. He orbited her star. I was just a distant speck of light he used to know. The guest list was a perfect snapshot of that universe. Victoria's parents, Harold and Gloria Blackwood, who looked at me with the polite disinterest one might reserve for the waitstaff. Her brother Sebastian and his wife, who smirked at each other when I said hello. And a handful of Victoria's friends, all of them dripping with designer labels and a sense of effortless superiority. My own parents, Robert and Ellen, were there too, looking perpetually uncomfortable, caught between their two sons, shifting in their seats like they were sitting on hot coals. From the moment I walked in, the subtle digs started, each one a tiny paper cut. "Oh, Mark, you're still driving that practical car?" Victoria had said, her voice syrupy sweet but her eyes holding a glint of amusement. Later, at the dinner table, one of her friends asked about my company. Before I could answer, Victoria chimed in, "It's some sort of computer thing. So complicated. Not as straightforward as law or finance. Is it, darling?" She directed the question to James, who just gave a non-committal grunt, too busy swirling the wine in his glass. The main event happened after dinner. I stood up to get another glass of water. As I turned from the counter, Victoria stepped back suddenly from a conversation, right into my path. I bumped her arm. It was nothing. Tiny, accidental collision. A few drops of water sloshed from my glass onto the sleeve of her silk dress. A Rorschach blot of tap water on a $1,000 piece of fabric. The reaction was nuclear. Crack. The sound of her hand hitting my cheek echoed through the silent room. My face exploded in a hot, sharp sting. Every eye was on me. Victoria's face was a mask of theatrical fury, her hand still raised slightly. "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man!" she shrieked, her voice high and piercing. "Look what you've done. Clean my dress and get out." My head was ringing. I looked past her, searching for my brother's face, expecting no praying, for a sliver of support, for him to step in and say, "Victoria, it was an accident." What I got was a wall of ice. James's expression was cold, annoyed, as if I was a stain on his perfect evening that he now had to deal with. He looked at me, his own brother, the man he grew up with, and said the words that would sever the last thread of our brotherhood. "Apologize to her, Mark, or leave." There was no warmth, no question, just a command. He'd made his choice. In that moment, he wasn't my brother. He was her husband. He was a Blackwood. I looked at my parents. My mother's eyes were wide with a sort of panicked helplessness. My father just stared down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the china. They were silent. Their silence was a scream of cowardice. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say that they would ever understand. I just looked at James, letting him see the end of whatever brotherhood we had left in my eyes. Then I turned, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The cold night air hit my burning cheek. I didn't know it then, but that slap wasn't an end. It was a beginning. It was the trigger for a chain of events that would bring their perfect, manicured world crashing down around them. Sitting in my car, parked just down the street from that soulless mansion, the engine was off. The only sound was the faint ringing in my ears and the thudding of my own heart against my ribs. My cheek throbbed, a hot, pulsing reminder of the last 30 minutes. But the physical pain was a dull echo compared to the cold, heavy weight settling in my gut. It was the weight of years of accumulated slights, of being pushed aside, of being treated as less than. This wasn't a new feeling. It was just the first time it had come with a soundtrack. The slap wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease that had been festering in my family for 6 long years. Ever since James had said, "I do" to Victoria, I closed my eyes, and the memories flooded in, unbidden, each one a fresh twist of the knife. I remembered the year I won the Innovator of the Year award. It was a huge deal in my industry, the culmination of 3 years of sleepless nights and relentless work. The ceremony was on a Saturday night in the city. I'd called James, my voice buzzing with an excitement I hadn't felt since I was a kid on Christmas morning. "James, I won. I actually won the award. That's fantastic, man. Really, that's great," he'd said, and for a second, I heard my old brother on the line. "Of course I'll be there. Front row. Wouldn't miss it for the world." That Saturday morning, he called. His voice was different, hesitant. "Hey, man. So, something's come up," he'd stammered. I could hear Victoria whispering in the background. "What's up?" I asked, a familiar sense of dread creeping in. "Well, Victoria's parents, they just decided to throw this last-minute gala tonight. For the hospital wing they're funding. So you know how it is, Mark. It's important for networking, for the firm. Harold expects me to be there. The award ceremony is tonight, James. You promised." I know, and I feel terrible. But this is different. It's business. You get that, right?" He'd pleaded, but it wasn't a real question. He had already made his decision. I went to the ceremony alone. I put on my rented tux, sat at my designated table, and made small talk with strangers. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage, the applause sounding distant and muted. I accepted the heavy glass trophy, looked out at the sea of faces, and saw the one empty seat I'd saved for him. I gave my speech, thanking my team, my mentors. I didn't thank my family. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I understood. But standing there, under the bright lights, holding proof of my success, I had never felt more alone. Then there was the startup. My startup. Before it became what it is today, it was just me, a laptop, and a dream running on fumes and maxed-out credit cards. I had a solid business plan and a working prototype that I knew was going to change things. I just needed a small seed investment to hire a couple of engineers and get office space that wasn't my own kitchen. I went to James. He was a junior partner at his firm by then, making more money than our parents had seen in their entire lives. We met at a steakhouse, his choice. I laid out my pitch, my passion evident in every slide of the presentation. He was impressed, genuinely impressed. "Mark, this is brilliant," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It's solid. The market's there. I'm in. Consider it done. We'll have the lawyers draw up the papers next week." The relief was overwhelming. Felt like I could finally breathe. It wasn't just the money. It was his belief in me. Felt like we were brothers again, partners. A week later, he called me. Not to set up a meeting with the lawyers, but to back out. "Hey, listen, about that investment." He started, his voice strained. "Yeah? Ready to sign?" I asked, oblivious. "Well, I ran the numbers by Victoria and she thinks it's a bit too risky right now. A bit too unconventional. She thinks it's better if I keep my investments in more traditional assets. Blue chip stocks, real estate, things we can count on. Things we can count on." The implication was clear. I wasn't something he could count on. You're pulling out? I asked, my voice flat. After you shook my hand, James? I'm sorry, man. My hands are tied. My finances are, well, they're tied up with hers now. It's complicated. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. He chose her opinion over his promise to me. I almost went bankrupt that year. I had to sell my car and move into a tiny apartment where the sound of my upstairs neighbors fighting was a constant soundtrack. I ate ramen noodles for dinner for 6 months straight. I clawed my way back on my own, securing a small business loan at an exorbitant interest rate and working 100-hour weeks. When my company finally landed its first major contract, the one that put us on the map, James had the nerve to call me up and say, "See, I knew you could do it. Good thing I didn't give you that money, right? Made you hungrier." He said it like a joke. And my parents, their betrayal was quieter, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. They were so dazzled by James's new life, by the Blackwood money and influence. They loved telling their friends at the local country club about it. "Oh, James and Victoria just got back from Aspen," my mother would say. Victoria's charity raised $500,000 at their last gala. When I told them I'd closed the deal that saved my company, my mother's response was, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Now, did I tell you Victoria is redecorating their summer home?" They weren't malicious. They were just weak. They were so afraid of upsetting the delicate balance, so terrified of losing access to the reflected glory of the Blackwoods, that they let Victoria run the show. They watched her belittle me, dismiss my work, and treat me like the poor relation who should be grateful for a seat at the table, and they never, ever said a word. They chose comfort over their own son, every single time. My hand tightened on the steering wheel, the leather groaning under the pressure. That was the real poison. It wasn't just Victoria's overt cruelty. It was the silent, smiling complicity of my entire family. They had all, in their own ways, been telling me for years that I wasn't enough, that my achievements didn't count unless they were stamped with the Blackwood seal of approval. And tonight, the slap, the ultimatum, it was just the loudest, most public announcement of what I'd already known for years. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. A hot surge of anger, clearer and purer than any I'd felt before, burned through the fog of hurt. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a man who had built a successful company from nothing. I had fought, I had failed, and I had gotten back up again and again. I had earned my place in the world, no thanks to any of them. And I was done. I was done being their doormat. I was done being the family's convenient scapegoat. I was done making myself small so they could feel big. But what did that mean? What could I even do? Walking away was one thing, but just disappearing felt like letting them win. It felt like accepting their narrative that I was the problem. No, they needed to understand. They needed to see the truth. Not just about their behavior, but about the woman they had all prostrated themselves before. People like Victoria, people who build their lives on a foundation of image and illusion, always have secrets. They always have cracks in the facade. You just have to know where to look. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over one name, Carter Reynolds. Carter was my best friend from college. While I was learning to code, he was in pre-law, a shark even then. He was brilliant, ruthless in a courtroom, and the most loyal person I had ever met. We hadn't talked as much since he'd moved to a big firm in the city, but we were still the kind of friends who could pick up right where we left off. He specialized in corporate litigation, but his real talent was uncovering things people wanted to keep hidden. He once described his job to me as finding the lies people write down. My finger hesitated. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for years to keep the peace, screamed at me to stop. Just let it go, Mark. It's not worth it. Just focus on your work. The biggest deal of my company's life was on the line. I was in the final stages of due diligence with Thompson Capital, a major investment firm run by the legendary Arthur Thompson. A family scandal was the last thing I needed. If word of this ugly incident got out, it could spook them. Maybe the smart move was to swallow my pride, lie low, and close the deal. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my ear, pleading, "Don't make waves, Mark. Think of the family's reputation." I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and I thought about the look on James's face. The cold, dismissive annoyance. He wasn't thinking about my reputation when he threw me out. He was only thinking of his. Victoria wasn't thinking about my company when she slapped me. They had fired the first shot. They had shown me exactly how much I mattered to them, which was not at all. Protecting my company wasn't about hiding from this. It was about neutralizing the threat. Victoria had shown she was willing to humiliate me publicly over a few drops of water. What would she do if she ever saw me as a real threat to her influence over James or the family? I had to know what I was dealing with. I had to protect myself. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. Mark? Man, it's late. Everything okay? Carter's voice was sharp, instantly alert. Hey, Carter. Sorry to call so late. Not really. I need your help. My voice was rougher than I expected. I told him everything. The years of little insults, the missed ceremony, the pulled investment. And then the dinner. The bump. The slap. The ultimatum. The wall of silent betrayal from my parents. I just laid it all out. The words spilling out of me in a torrent of pain and anger that had been dammed up for far too long. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. I could hear the faint sound of him typing on a keyboard. Carter? You there? I'm here, he said, his voice low and tight. I'm just pulling up the public records on Victoria Blackwood Wilson. Mark, these people are not your family. They're a corporation, and you're an asset they've decided to write off. I flinched. The words were brutal, but they rang with truth. A part of me thinks I should just let it go, I admitted, the doubt creeping back in. I've got this huge deal with Thompson Capital in the final stages. I can't afford any drama right now. Listen to me, Carter said, his voice cutting through my uncertainty like a laser. You think this is the end of the drama? This is the beginning. A woman who would slap you in public for spilling water is not a rational person. She's a narcissist with a fragile ego. The fact that you walked out, that you didn't grovel, is a challenge to her. She won't let that go. If you don't get ahead of this, she will come after you. She'll find a way to poison your deal with Thompson. She'll whisper things in your parents' ears. She will try to burn your life to the ground to prove she was right. If you don't protect yourself in this, how are you going to protect your company? You didn't start this fight, Mark, but you have to finish it. He was right. Every word hit me like a physical blow. He saw it with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself to have. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. Okay, I said, my voice steady now, the decision made. What do? We dig, Carter said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. We find out who Victoria Blackwood Wilson really is when the cameras are off. We find out where the cracks are. And I promise you, Mark, everybody has cracks. Whatever it costs, Carter. I don't care. Don't worry about that now. I'll assemble a small, discreet team. A forensic accountant, a digital investigator. People I trust. You just lay low. Don't answer their calls. Don't engage. Let them think you're licking your wounds. Let them underestimate you. It's the biggest advantage we have. I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washing over me. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest. But now it was mixed with something else. Purpose. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't just reacting to the drama they created. I was writing my own script. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, leaving the perfectly lit mansion and my old life behind in the rearview mirror. I didn't know what Carter would find, but I knew one thing for sure. The next time I saw my brother and his wife, it would be on my terms. The days that followed were quiet, eerily quiet on my end, but I knew a storm of text messages and voicemails was building, a storm I was determined to ignore. I put my phone on silent and let them all pile up, unanswered. Each buzz was a phantom limb, a twitch from a part of my life I was trying to amputate. Just as Carter had predicted, my mother, Ellen, was the first to launch a full-scale assault. I didn't listen to the voicemails, but the text previews told the whole story. Mark, please call me. I'm so worried. Honey, this isn't like you. We're family. We can work this out. Victoria is very hurt. You really embarrassed her. You need to make this right. Her version of making this right was me crawling back and apologizing for the crime of being assaulted. I deleted them without reading the full messages. Then came the texts from James. They were a masterclass in emotional whiplash. The first one, sent late on Thanksgiving night, was pure anger. What the hell is your problem? You embarrassed the whole family in front of the Blackwoods. The next one, probably after a conversation with our mother, was softer, feigning a sort of pained reasonability. Look, I get you're mad, but you need to be the bigger person here. It was a misunderstanding. Just apologize to Victoria so we can all move on. Move on. As if the last 6 years, culminating in a public humiliation, could be wiped clean with a forced apology. As if moving on was a destination we could all get to if I just agreed to carry all the baggage. I didn't reply. I forwarded the screenshots to Carter with a one-word message. Fuel. He replied with a single emoji. A pickaxe. I threw myself into my work. The Thompson Capital deal was my fortress, its walls built of code and logic. I worked with a singular focus, finalizing the data for their due diligence team, triple-checking every projection, every line of code. It was a world that made sense, a world where effort and merit mattered. The late nights in the office, fueled by stale coffee and a cold, simmering anger, felt more like home than my parents' house ever had. A week later, Carter and I met at a quiet, old-school diner halfway between my office and his. He slid into the booth opposite me, a thin leather folio in his hand. He looked tired but energized, like a hound on a fresh scent. Morning, he said, ordering a black coffee. Sleep well. Not really, I admitted. I keep replaying it in my head. Good, he said with a grim smile. Don't forget why we're doing this. He opened the folio. Okay, so my team has been digging. Victoria is smart, I'll give her that. Her personal finances are a fortress of trusts and offshore accounts. Clean as a whistle on the surface. But her charity, the Blackwood Foundation for the Arts? That's another story. What about it? I asked, leaning forward, my own coffee forgotten. It's a classic high society slush fund, Carter said, tapping a page in the folio. The public financials look fine. They donate just enough to keep their nonprofit status. But my forensic accountant, Zoe, is a wizard. She's the kind of person who sees the matrix in spreadsheets. She found some creative accounting. He explained it to me in simple terms. Inflated invoices for event planning from preferred vendors who likely kicked back a portion. Massive consulting fees paid to shell corporations for services that were never rendered. It was subtle, 1,000 tiny cuts bleeding the foundation dry. She's not stealing enough to bankrupt the place, just enough to fund a very lavish lifestyle without touching her official income or trust fund. Carter continued. A new couture wardrobe here, a spa weekend there. It all adds up. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. So she's a thief. She's a very sophisticated thief, Carter corrected. But here's where it gets interesting. These shell corporations, they're a pain to trace. Most of them are dead ends, registered to anonymous agents in Delaware or Wyoming. But Victoria got a little sloppy, or arrogant. She created one herself, probably thinking no one would ever look that closely. How do you know? A company called Argent Creative Solutions. It received a consulting payment for $80,000 for a gala they supposedly organized last spring. We checked. The real event planner for that gala was a different company entirely. The thing is, Argent Creative Solutions doesn't exist. It's just a name on a mailbox in a strip mall in Delaware. But Zoe, bless her detail-oriented heart, managed to trace the bank account it was paid into. And from there, she found a recurring pattern of payments. Monthly transfers, always to the same set of accounts. He paused for dramatic effect, taking a slow sip of his coffee. I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. Guess who one of those accounts belongs to? Who, Carter? A man named Alexander Reeves. The name meant nothing to me. Who is Alexander Reeves? He is the CEO of Reeves Development Group, a direct competitor to the Blackwood family business. A very, very aggressive competitor. He's also very married, with 3 kids and a wife who sits on 2 of the same charity boards as Victoria. The silence stretched across the vinyl booth. The cheerful diner sounds, the clatter of plates, the low murmur of conversations, faded into the background. I felt the floor drop out from under me. It wasn't just theft. It was sordid. It was treacherous. Are you saying? I'm saying that for the last 18 months, Victoria has been having an affair with her family's biggest business rival, Carter said. We don't have photos yet, but the financial trail is undeniable. The payments, the timing of her business trips to cities where he was attending conferences. It's all there. The first major crack in the facade. I sank back against the booth, my head spinning. This was bigger than I thought. This wasn't just about her being cruel to me. This was about a level of deception that was pathological. She wasn't just cheating on my brother. She was doing it with an enemy. What kind of person does that? What kind of secrets was she sharing with him over pillow talk? There's more, Carter said, his voice turning serious. He slid a printed email across the table. We got this 2 days ago. The email was from a Proton Mail account, a service known for its encryption and anonymity. It was short and to the point. To whom it may concern, I used to work as a junior accountant at the Blackwood Foundation. I was fired 6 months ago after I asked my superior about a large payment to a company called Argent Creative Solutions. The invoice looked fake. 2 days later, Victoria Wilson called me into her office. She accused me of incompetence and of being a disloyal employee. She said I didn't have the right discretion for the foundation. Security escorted me from the building. I can't prove anything, but I saw her leaving the office late one evening with Alexander Reeves. Be careful. She is a snake. It was signed, a former employee. My blood ran cold. I looked up at Carter. She destroyed this person's career to cover her tracks. Her name is Maria Sanchez, Carter said, tapping the email. Zoe did some digging. Top of her class, glowing recommendations before this job. Now she's working as a bookkeeper for a small grocery chain. Victoria didn't just fire her. She blacklisted her, ruined her reputation. So there was someone else. Another person whose life Victoria had trampled on without a second thought, just for getting too close to the truth. My fight suddenly felt bigger than just me. This is good, Carter. This is huge, I said, my voice low. It's a start, he said. The affair and the embezzlement give us leverage. But it's circumstantial. We need something solid. Something undeniable. I've hired a PI. A good one. Former cop named Lucas. He's going to be discreet. Let's see what a little surveillance turns up. The next few weeks were a blur of work and tense updates from Carter. Lucas, the PI, was good. The information started trickling in. Photos of Victoria and Alexander Reeves having lunch at an out-of-the-way restaurant, their heads close together in intimate conversation. Hotel receipts from a boutique hotel 2 towns over, always checked in under his name, always paid in cash. The evidence was piling up, a mountain of deceit that was shocking even to me. Just as I was starting to feel like we had some leverage, the pressure from my family ramped up into a full-scale emotional siege. This time, it was a coordinated attack. My mother called again, and this time I made the mistake of answering. Her voice was strained and tearful from the first word. Mark, I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop. James is a wreck. He's not sleeping. He says you won't answer his calls. This silence, it's tearing us all apart. My silence is tearing you apart? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Or is it the fact that for the first time, I'm not playing my assigned role in this family drama? That's not fair, she cried, her voice rising with indignation. Victoria is willing to forgive you. Can you not see how generous that is? All you have to do is be a man and apologize. She's even offered to let you do it at a small family dinner, to make it less embarrassing for you. The sheer, breathtaking condescension of it almost made me laugh. She was willing to forgive me. Mom, let me be very clear. I was the one who was assaulted. In front of you. Did you forget that part? Oh, don't be so dramatic, she snapped, her patience finally breaking. revealing the steel underneath the velvet glove. It was a little slap. You're a grown man. Your brother's marriage and his position are more important than your bruised ego. You know how important the Blackwood connection is for all of us. For your father's investments that James manages, for the club membership. You are being incredibly selfish, Mark. You're risking everything for a moment of pride. There it was. The ugly, unvarnished truth, laid bare. It wasn't about family. It was about access. It was about money. They weren't a family. They were stakeholders in the corporation of James and Victoria's lifestyle. I have to go, Mom, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I hung up before she could reply, my hand shaking with a white-hot rage. I felt the old doubt creeping in again, the sheer exhaustion of the fight. Maybe I should just leak the affair to a gossip blog and be done with it. Burn it all down and walk away. It would be messy, but it would be over. That evening, I got a text from James. It was the final straw, the thing that solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. Okay, I'm done playing games. I talked to Victoria. She's agreed to put this behind us if you make a public apology at the family Christmas party. In front of everyone. Is that, or you're no longer welcome in this family? Your choice. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Your choice. He was drawing a line in the sand. Him, the golden child who had everything handed to him. The brother who had betrayed me at every turn. He was giving me an ultimatum. A cold clarity washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my doubt. Carter was right. This would never end until I ended it. But leaking it to the press was messy and, in a way, cowardly. It was their style, not mine. This needed to be done face to face. They needed to see my face when their world came crashing down. They needed to hear the truth from my own lips. I picked up the phone and texted James back. My fingers were steady. The tremor was gone. You're right. We need to resolve this. Forget the Christmas party. Why don't you and Victoria come over to my apartment tomorrow night? Just the three of us. It's time we talked. A minute later, his reply came in. Fine. 7 p.m. Don't waste our time. I leaned back, a grim smile on my face. The trap was set. They thought they were walking into an apology. They had no idea they were walking into a reckoning. The next 24 hours were the calm before the storm. After James confirmed, I immediately called Carter, pacing the length of my small living room. It's on, I said, my voice low. They're coming to my place tomorrow night at 7. Are you sure you're ready for this, Mark? Carter's voice was all business. The friendly diner companion replaced by the sharp-edged lawyer. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. The fallout is going to be massive. Nuclear, even. I've never been more ready, I said, and I meant it. The fear and doubt had been burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard certainty. I need everything you have, Carter. Printed out. Organized. I want a file for every single one of her lies. I want it so simple even a child could understand it. My team is already on it, he said. Zoe is compiling the financial data into a clean, easy-to-understand report with highlighted sections and a one-page summary. Lucas is sending over the high-resolution photos of Victoria and Reeves. He even got one of them kissing in a hotel parking garage. It's grainy, but it's undeniable. I'll have a courier bring the package to your apartment tomorrow afternoon. Read it. Memorize it. Be prepared for her to lie, to cry, to try and turn it back on you. After the call, I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt like a stage being set for a final act. I walked through the living room, picturing it. James would sit on the sofa, looking uncomfortable and impatient, checking his watch. Victoria would stand by the window, judging my furniture, her posture radiating a condescending boredom. They would be expecting me to grovel. The chasm between their expectation and the reality of what was about to happen was so vast it was almost funny. The next afternoon, as promised, a courier delivered a thick, heavy manila envelope. No return address, just my name on the front. My hands trembled slightly as I undid the clasp. Carter was nothing if not thorough. Inside, there were 3 separate folders, their tabs neatly labeled in his precise block lettering. The first was labeled Alexander Reeves. It contained everything Carter had promised. Crystal clear photos of Victoria and Reeves lunching at a secluded outdoor cafe, their heads close together in intimate conversation. Another showed them leaving a hotel, getting into separate cars. And there it was, the grainy but unmistakable shot of them in a dimly lit parking garage, her arms around his neck, their lips locked. Below it were copies of hotel bills, airline tickets for her business trips, and a timeline that cross-referenced her schedule with his. It was a meticulous, irrefutable narrative of infidelity. The second folder was labeled Blackwood Foundation. It was Zoe's report. It was a work of art. Pages of spreadsheets, flowcharts, and bank statements, all distilled into a damning 2-page summary. It showed nearly $200,000 siphoned off over 2 years, traced through the shell corporations and directly linked to personal purchases. A $10,000 handbag from a Paris boutique, first-class flight upgrades, payments on a luxury car lease. It was meticulous, undeniable proof of embezzlement. I picked up the third folder. It was thinner than the others. It was labeled with my own name, Mark Wilson. I frowned, confused. Carter hadn't mentioned this one specifically. I opened it. My breath hitched in my chest. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Inside was a report from another private investigator, a shady PI named Raymond Moss, with a string of questionable clients. The client who hired him, Victoria Wilson. The objective, a full background and surveillance report on Mark Wilson. My life, my business, my world, reduced to a series of typed pages. It was all there. My work schedule, my financial history pulled from who knows where, notes from interviews with disgruntled former employees I'd had to let go years ago, their quotes likely twisted to paint me as a volatile boss. Surveillance photos of me going into my office, having lunch with friends, even one of me meeting with the due diligence team from Thompson Capital. Notes on my friendships, my dating life or lack thereof. It was a 6-month campaign to dig up any dirt, any weakness, any scandal she could possibly use against me. And then I saw the PI's final summary, a paragraph on the last page, and the blood drained from my face. My skin went cold. Subject's primary professional vulnerability is the pending investment from Thompson Capital. Client has requested any information that could be used to anonymously disrupt this deal, specifically looking for evidence of financial instability, professional misconduct, or personal indiscretions that could be leaked to Thompson's firm to paint the subject as an unstable and risky investment. Client is adamant that the disruption appear to be from a third-party source. I dropped the folder on the coffee table as if it were on fire. This changed everything. This wasn't just about her ego. It wasn't just petty cruelty or covering up her own crimes. This was a calculated, premeditated attack on my livelihood, on the company I had bled for. She was actively trying to ruin me. She saw my potential success not as something to be proud of, but as a threat that needed to be neutralized. She didn't just want me to stay in my place. She wanted to burn my place to the ground so she could stand on the ashes. She wanted to destroy the one thing in my life that was truly mine. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, but I didn't see them. The anger I'd felt before was gone, replaced by something much colder, much more dangerous. It was the chilling calm of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. My relationship with my brother was an illusion. My place in my family was a transaction. All I had was the life I had built for myself, and she had tried to destroy it. There was no more debate, no more what-ifs. There was only the path forward. I spent the next few hours preparing. I didn't just stack the folders on the table. I took out the key documents from each one. I placed the most damning photo of Victoria and Reeves on top of the first pile, the parking garage kiss. I put the 2-page summary of Zoe's financial report on the second. And I put the PI's summary of his objective to sabotage my deal on top of the third, using a highlighter to mark the damning sentences. I set up my living room with meticulous care. I made a fresh pot of coffee, the aroma filling the small space. I put out 3 mugs. I wanted the scene to be disarmingly normal, almost mundane. I wanted them to walk in feeling completely in control, like they were visiting a disobedient subordinate. At 6:55 p.m., I stood in the center of my living room and took a long, slow breath. My heart was a steady drum in my chest. I was no longer the little brother, the outsider, the failure. Tonight, I was the one holding all the cards. I was the one who knew the truth. The doorbell rang, sharp and demanding. Showtime. I opened the door. There they were, a united front of wealth and entitlement, framed in the doorway of my humble apartment. James stood stiffly in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my rent, his face a mask of weary impatience. Victoria was beside him, a small, condescending smile playing on her lips. She was dressed in a chic, understatedly expensive dress, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked me up and down, her eyes scanning my simple apartment with a flicker of disdain before she stepped inside as if she owned the place. "Well, Mark," she said, her voice smooth as silk as she ran a finger along a bookshelf. "This is cozy. I'm glad you finally decided to be reasonable. It's for the best, really." James just grunted, avoiding my eyes as he walked over to the sofa and sat down, crossing his legs. He immediately pulled out his phone. "Let's just get this over with, Mark. We have a dinner reservation at 8. They thought this was my surrender. They were here to receive my apology, offer a condescending pardon, and be on their way to a fancy restaurant. The arrogance was so thick I could taste it, metallic and sour." I closed the door quietly and walked over to the coffee table. I didn't sit down. I remained standing, looking down at them. It was a subtle shift in power, but I felt it. In their world, he who stands presides. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice even and calm. "No, thank you," Victoria said, waving a dismissive hand as she inspected a framed photo of my parents. "Let's just hear what you have to say so we can all move on with our lives." "You're right," I said. "Let's talk about moving on." I let the silence hang for a beat. "Let's start by talking about your business trips, Victoria. The ones for the foundation. You seem to be traveling a lot lately. All that charity work must be exhausting." Victoria's smile tightened just a fraction. She turned from the bookshelf to face me. "My charity work is very demanding. It requires a great deal of travel and networking. Something you wouldn't understand." James looked up from his phone, annoyed. "What does this have to do with anything? Mark, I'm not in the mood for games. Apologize and let's go." "I'm getting there," I said. I reached down and picked up the first folder, the one labeled Alexander Reeves. "It's funny. Your trips seem to align perfectly with the travel schedule of a man named Alexander Reeves, the CEO of your father's biggest competitor." I took the first photo, the grainy parking garage kiss, and slid it across the coffee table. It landed right in front of James. He froze. His thumb stopped scrolling. He stared at the photo, his face draining of all color. His eyes darted from the picture to Victoria, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time all evening, I had his full attention. Victoria laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound that was a little too loud for the room. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Alex is a colleague, a friend. You're taking a blurry, out-of-context photo and trying to turn it into something sordid? This is pathetic, Mark. Truly. You're so desperate to deflect from your own bad behavior that you've resorted to this." She was good. She was a phenomenal liar. Her eyes were wide with mock innocence. Her tone pitched with just the right amount of hurt indignation. "Is that what this is?" I asked calmly. I tossed a few more photos onto the table. Them at the secluded cafe, their heads close together. Them leaving the hotel, 5 minutes apart. A copy of a hotel bill paid in cash for a suite with a king-sized bed. Just a series of very friendly, late-night, out-of-town board meetings in a hotel room paid for in cash. James picked up the hotel bill, his hand shaking so much the paper rattled. He looked at Victoria, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Victoria, what is this? Tell me what this is." "It's fake," she snapped, her voice rising, losing its silky quality. "He's faking it. Your brother is trying to destroy our marriage because he's jealous. He's always been jealous of you, of us, of everything we have. She turned on me, her eyes flashing with real venom now. You couldn't stand to see your brother happy. So you cooked up this disgusting fantasy. You probably paid some woman to dress like me. A fantasy? I said, my voice still level. I picked up the second folder. Is the Blackwood Foundation a fantasy, too? Because my fantasy includes $80,000 in consulting fees to a non-existent company called Argent Creative Solutions. It includes invoices for flowers for a gala that cost more than my first car. It includes $200,000 of charity money. Money meant for art programs for kids, that you siphoned off to pay for your jewelry and your vacations and God knows what else. I dropped the 2-page financial summary on top of the photos. James flinched as if it had burned him. He didn't even look at it. He just stared at his wife, a dawning horror in his eyes. He was a lawyer. He knew what embezzlement meant. He knew what fraud meant. He knew what a jury would think. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Her face, a moment ago so controlled, was now twisted with rage. You son of a bitch, she spat, the words ugly and raw. You went through my things? You hired someone to spy on me? This is illegal. You want to talk about hiring people to spy, Victoria? I said, my voice dropping, becoming as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I picked up the third folder, the one with my name on it. This was it, the final arrow, the one they would never see coming. This isn't about your affair, Victoria. It's not even about the money you stole. As disgusting as all that is, I might have been able to forgive it. For the sake of what was left of this family. I looked directly at James, forcing him to meet my gaze. But this is something else entirely. I slid the folder in front of him. This is what your wife has been busy with for the last 6 months. This is what she thinks of your brother. James opened it numbly. He read the first page, the report from the PI, Raymond Moss. He saw the objective summary. His eyes scanned the lines, and I watched his face crumble. I watched the last vestiges of his denial, his pride, his entire worldview, shatter into a million pieces. He read the highlighted words out loud, his voice barely a whisper, the sound sucked out of the room. Client has requested any information that could be used to anonymously disrupt this deal. Paint the subject as an unstable and risky investment. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying, gut-wrenching understanding. This wasn't a wife's betrayal. This wasn't a financial crime. This was an attack on his brother. A cold, calculated attempt to destroy my life's work, to ruin me, to ensure I would never, ever rise to their level. He turned to Victoria, the man who had defended her, chosen her, and enabled her for 6 long years finally saw her for what she was. The scales didn't just fall from his eyes. They were ripped away. You did this? He whispered, his voice shaking with a rage so deep it was almost silent. You tried to ruin him? My brother. And that's when Victoria lost it completely. The mask of the elegant socialite was gone, burned away by pure, undiluted rage and panic. Ruin him? She shrieked, her voice cracking, soaring into a register of pure hysteria. He was ruining everything. His little startup, his pathetic ambition. He was getting ideas. You were starting to listen to him. Don't you see? He was a threat, a weed in our garden that needed to be pulled. Yes, I did it. And I'd do it again. He doesn't deserve what he has. He doesn't belong in our world. He belongs in the gutter where he came from. Silence. The confession, raw and ugly and dripping with venom, hung in the air of my small apartment. She had admitted to everything. She had confirmed every suspicion, every fear. James just stared at her, his face a canvas of shock, betrayal, and a profound, bottomless disgust. The woman he had married, the woman he had defended against his own blood, the woman for whom he had sacrificed his own integrity, was a monster, and he had been her willing accomplice. He stood up slowly, like a very old man, his movements stiff and jerky. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Victoria. He just looked at the damning pile of evidence on my coffee table, the evidence of a life built on lies. With a shaking hand, he gathered all 3 folders, stacking them neatly, methodically. He tucked them under his arm like a death sentence. "James, darling, wait," Victoria stammered, the rage suddenly replaced by a wild, desperate panic as she realized what was happening. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. "We can talk about this. Don't listen to him. It's him or me, James. It has always been him or me. Choose." James finally looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes. No love, no anger, not even hate. Just a vast, empty, desolate void. "I think I already have," he said, his voice dead, flat. And with that, he turned and walked out the door, the click of the lock sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. He left Victoria standing alone in the middle of my living room, her perfect world lying in ruins at her feet. The sound of the front door closing echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. For a moment, Victoria just stood there, frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her face a mask of disbelief. The panic in her eyes quickly curdled back into a familiar, venomous rage, and she whirled on me, her last target. "You," she hissed, her finger jabbing the air, trembling with fury. "You did this. You have destroyed my life, my marriage." I didn't flinch. I just stood there, looking at her, feeling nothing but a profound, weary emptiness. All the anger I'd held onto for weeks, the fuel that had gotten me this far, had vanished, leaving a hollow space behind. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just the grim, ugly reality of the wreckage. "No, Victoria," I said, my voice calm and steady, which seemed to infuriate her even more. "You did this. You built your life on lies, and the foundation just gave way. This was always going to happen. I just decided to stop holding up the walls for you. I will ruin you," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "You think this is over? My family will crush you. They will sue you into oblivion. You will have nothing. You will be nothing." "Your family?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the family whose biggest business rival you were sleeping with? The family whose good name you put at risk by embezzling from your own charity? You think they're going to stand by you? You're a liability now, Victoria. A scandal waiting to happen. And the Blackwoods have always been experts at cutting their losses. You're not family to them. You're a stock that just crashed." The truth of my words hit her like a physical blow. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a desperate, ugly fear. She saw her future spooling out in front of her. The scandal, the divorce, the social exile, the loss of the money and status that she had built her entire identity around. She was no longer Victoria Blackwood Wilson, the powerful socialite. She was just Victoria, and she had nothing. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Then, with a strangled sob that sounded more like a wounded animal than a person, she turned and fled. She practically tripped over her own feet as she scrambled out of my apartment, slamming the door behind her with a force that rattled the pictures on my walls. And then I was alone. The silence that descended was heavier than the noise that had preceded it. I sank onto the sofa, the adrenaline finally leaving my system, making my limbs feel heavy as lead. My body felt shaky and weak. I stared at the empty space on the coffee table where the folders had been. It was over. The confrontation I had dreaded and planned for was done. I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt tired. So incredibly tired. Tired of the lies, the fighting, the toxicity. It was like I had just finished a marathon I never wanted to run, and now I had to figure out how to walk again. I sat there for what felt like hours, just breathing, letting the quiet seep into my bones. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, my capacity for human interaction completely depleted. But something told me to. "Hello, it's me." James's voice. It was unrecognizable, raw, broken, and completely stripped of its usual arrogance. I could hear the echoey sound of a hotel room. "I'm at the Marriott downtown. I read everything, every page, twice. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky, ragged breath. Is it all true, Mark? All of it? It was a stupid question. He had the proof in his hands. He had heard the confession from her own lips, but I understood what he was asking. He was asking for a lifeline, for a sliver of hope that this was all some horrible nightmare, that some part of it was a lie. I couldn't give it to him. Yes, James? I said softly. It's all true. He was silent for a long time. I could hear the muffled sound of traffic from the street below his window. He let out a long, shuddering sigh. The PI report. She really tried to sabotage your deal? To ruin you? Yes. Because I was... What? Listening to you? Because we had lunch that one time. I don't know why, James. I don't think I'll ever understand. He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. God, I'm such a fool. Such a blind, arrogant fool. He fell silent again, and when he spoke next, his voice was thick with a new emotion. Self-loathing. Why? He whispered, and the word was full of so much pain and confusion. Why didn't you tell me? About the affair? Why didn't you come to me sooner? The old anger, the old hurt, flared in my chest for a moment. It was so typical of him. Even now, at the rock bottom of his own making, his first instinct was to find a way to shift a tiny piece of the blame. And what, James? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. What would have happened if I had? Let's be honest. Let's play it out. If I had come to you a month ago with no proof and told you your wife was cheating on you with Alexander Reeves, who would you have believed? Me, the brother you've always looked down on, the one you think is jealous of your life? Or your perfect, powerful wife, the center of your universe? He didn't answer. He knew the answer. You would have called me a liar, I continued, pressing the point, needing him to see it clearly. You would have accused me of being jealous and bitter. You would have thrown me out of your house, just like you did on Thanksgiving. The only difference is you wouldn't have known you were wrong. You would have gone on believing the lie, and you would have hated me for trying to show you the truth. The truth of it hung between us, stark and undeniable. He didn't have a defense because we both knew it was true. I defended her, he said, his voice cracking. When you walked out that night, she told me you had made an inappropriate pass at her, that you were drunk and belligerent, and I believed her. I almost called you to tear you apart, Mark. I believed her over you. That was a new knife, one I hadn't expected. I closed my eyes. Of course you did. I have to go, he said finally, his voice thick with unshed tears. He hung up. That call was the beginning of the fallout. The next day, Carter called me. It's starting, he said. I just got a call from a lawyer at the Blackwood family firm. A courtesy call. They wanted to let me know that they are aware of the unfortunate allegations against Victoria and that their family respects the legal process and will cooperate fully with any official investigation. It was code for we're cutting her loose and throwing her to the wolves. As I had predicted, the Blackwoods moved swiftly to contain the damage. They were a corporation and Victoria was now a toxic asset. News of James moving out spread through their social circle like wildfire. The story was spun carefully. A tragic, private marital issue. But the whispers had already started. Whispers about Alexander Reeves. Whispers about financial irregularities at the foundation. Victoria was instantly ostracized. Her friends stopped answering her calls. She was asked to step down from her charity boards. Her parents issued a cold, public statement about their disappointment and then went silent. Within a week, she had lost everything that mattered to her. James filed for divorce, the petition citing irreconcilable differences. But everyone who mattered knew the real story. I felt a strange detachment watching it all unfold from a distance. There was a part of me that thought I would feel vindicated, triumphant. But I didn't. Seeing her life implode didn't bring me any joy. It was just a sad, ugly end to a sad, ugly story. The real victory wasn't her downfall. It was my freedom. The freedom from their judgment, from their expectations, from the constant low-level poison they had been feeding me for years. The family I thought I wanted was a sham. And sometimes you have to burn down a sham to see what's real. And what was real was that I was finally on my own. And it was terrifying. And it was liberating. The first few months after the storm were about rebuilding. Not just my family life, but my own sense of self. With the constant drama gone, there was a quiet void, and I had to learn who I was without it. I poured myself into my work, and for the first time, it wasn't an escape from my family. It was a passion I was pursuing for myself. The team at Thompson Capital had, of course, heard the rumors. The world of high finance and tech is surprisingly small, a village of whispers and backchannels. The day James's divorce filing hit the public record, I got a call from Arthur Thompson's assistant, summoning me to his office. I walked into the high-rise building, a sleek temple of glass and steel overlooking the city, my stomach in knots. I was prepared to defend myself, to explain the situation, to prove I wasn't a liability. Mr. Thompson waved me to a chair opposite his vast mahogany desk. He was a man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Mark," he said, getting straight to the point, "there's been a lot of noise around your family lately. Ugly stuff." "Yes, sir," I said, my hands clasped tight in my lap. "I can explain everything. It won't be a distraction." "No need." He cut me off, holding up a hand. He leaned forward, a faint, wry smile on his face. "My due diligence team is the best in the business. They don't just look at balance sheets and market projections, they look at character. They look at risk. They found out about the private investigator your sister-in-law hired to sabotage this deal 2 weeks ago." I was stunned into silence. "You knew." "I knew," he confirmed, his gaze steady. "It was a test of a sort, an unscheduled one. I wanted to see how you would handle it. You could have panicked. You could have let the family drama derail your focus. You could have come to me begging, trying to do damage control. You did none of those things. You handled your business. You protected your company. You identified a threat and neutralized it with precision and discretion, without creating a public circus. Frankly, it was one of the most impressive things I've seen from a founder in a long time." He pushed a thick folder across the desk. It had his firm's logo on it. "I don't just invest in companies, son. I invest in leaders, people who can navigate storms, not just fair weather. And you've proven you're a leader." He tapped the folder. "This is our final offer. It's 20% higher than our initial one. We're all in. Congratulations." I walked out of that building feeling 10 feet tall. It wasn't about the money, though that was life-changing. It was the validation. It was a respected, powerful man looking at me and seeing my worth, not based on my family name or connections, but on my own merit, on my character, the very thing Victoria had tried to assassinate. Around that same time, James started reaching out again. The calls were tentative at first, awkward. He had moved into a modest apartment downtown, sold the expensive car, and was in the process of leaving his high-powered law firm. He told me he was joining a smaller, less prestigious firm where he could actually practice law and help small businesses, not just manage the fortunes of the wealthy. He was, for the first time in his adult life, becoming his own man. One Saturday, we met for coffee at a small, independent shop, a world away from the steakhouses he used to frequent. He looked different, thinner. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The arrogance in his posture was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He looked tired, but his eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years. "I've been going to therapy," he said, stirring his coffee without looking at me. "Twice a week, trying to unravel how I let things get so bad, how I became that person." He looked up, and his eyes were full of a shame that was deep and real. "I was a coward, Mark. It's the simplest word for it. I was so dazzled by the money and the status, so terrified of losing it, that I sacrificed my own brother to keep it. I let her hurt you, again and again, and I stood by and watched because it was easier than confronting her. Easier than risking the lifestyle she gave me. There is no excuse for what I did. I am so sorry." It was the apology I had waited 6 years to hear. And when it finally came, it was simple, unadorned, and from the heart. There were no justifications, no deflections. Just the plain, ugly truth. "I know, James," I said. "Thank you for saying that." Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could just flip, but it was a door I was willing to open, just a crack. My relationship with my parents was more complicated. My father remained distant, communicating through my mother, unable to face his own complicity. My mother, however, was forced to confront it. She called me a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, her voice trembling. "I just don't understand why it had to come to this," she began, falling back into her old script. "Your brother has lost everything." "No, Mom," I corrected her gently but firmly. "He's lost a lifestyle. He's in the process of finding himself. There's a difference. What he had wasn't real." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a sob. "I knew she was cruel, Mark," she finally admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush of tears and guilt that had been held back for years. "From the very beginning. I saw the way she looked at you when she thought no one was watching. I heard the little comments, the backhanded compliments. I knew it wasn't right, but I was scared. I'm not making excuses, I'm just telling you the truth. I was scared of the Blackwoods, scared of their money, their power, scared that if I spoke up, they would cut James off and we would lose him. So I said nothing. I chose being comfortable over being a good mother. And I am so ashamed." Hearing her admit it was both painful and liberating. It confirmed that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined all those years of subtle cruelty. "I appreciate you telling me that, Mom," I said, "and I meant it. But it's going to take time for us to heal. A long time. We need to set some new boundaries. Our relationship has to be based on honesty now, not on keeping up appearances or pretending things are okay when they're not." It was a slow process. There were still awkward conversations, moments of backsliding into old habits. But for the first time, we were actually talking. We were building something real, however fragile. Life started to have color again. I had spent so long in the gray fog of family drama that I had forgotten what sunlight felt like. I reconnected with old friends. I started exploring my own city, going to museums, concerts, places I never had time for before. It was at a small art gallery opening downtown that I met Sienna. She was the curator, and I saw her across the room, talking about a painting with such passion and intelligence that I was completely captivated. She had a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and a laugh that was loud and uninhibited. I, a person who normally avoids social gatherings, found myself walking over and introducing myself. We ended up talking for 2 hours, ignoring everyone else in the room. She was different from anyone I had ever met. She was fiercely independent, funny, and completely unimpressed by money or status. She asked me what I was passionate about, not what I did for a living. When I did tell her about my company, she said, "That's cool. So you get to solve puzzles all day." She saw the world in a way that was refreshing and real. A few dates later, sitting in a park, I told her the whole story. I laid it all out, expecting her to be shocked, maybe even a little scared off by the sheer messiness of it all. She listened patiently, without judgment, her eyes never leaving mine. When I was done, she just put her hand on my arm. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said simply. "That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry." She paused, then gave me a small, encouraging smile. "But I'm not surprised you came out the other side. You have a good heart, Mark Wilson. It's the first thing I noticed about you. With Sienna, things were easy. They were honest. It wasn't about power dynamics or social climbing. It was just two people enjoying each other's company, building something based on shared values and mutual respect. It was a new beginning. It was the kind of peace I had forgotten could exist. I was finally building a life of my own design, not one dictated by surviving toxic family dynamics. It was a life I had fought for. It was a life that was truly my own. A year to the day after that fateful Thanksgiving, I hosted a dinner party of my own. It wasn't in a sterile mansion built to intimidate guests, but in the warm, inviting space of my new home, a place I'd bought with the first payout from the Thompson deal. It was a modest house with a big backyard, filled with books and comfortable furniture. The air smelled of roasted chicken and garlic, and the sound of laughter and easy conversation filled the rooms. The guest list was small and carefully curated. Carter was there, raising a glass of bourbon and making a loud, dramatic toast to finishing fights and billing for emotional damages. Sienna was by my side, her hand resting comfortably in mine, her presence a source of calm, steady warmth. A few good friends from my company and college, people who had known me before and after, filled out the table. And so was James. He came alone. He seemed to have shed another layer of his old self. He looked lighter. He had started his own small law practice, and he spent dinner telling us, with genuine enthusiasm, about helping a local bakery navigate a zoning dispute and a young couple buy their first home. He wasn't making Blackwood money, but he was happy. He was proud of his work, something I hadn't seen in him since we were teenagers dreaming of the future. Our relationship wasn't what it was when we were kids sharing a bedroom, and it never would be. You can't unbreak something that's been shattered. There were still scars, but underneath them, something new was growing. A fragile bond built on a difficult, shared truth, and a mutual respect earned the hard way. During dinner, one of my friends who follows the financial news mentioned he'd read an article about the Blackwood Empire facing serious financial trouble. Apparently, their new CEO, Alexander Reeves, had made a series of disastrously risky bets, and the company was hemorrhaging money. His name just hung in the air for a moment. James just shook his head, a sad, knowing look on his face. He looked at me across the table. Some people build empires on rock, he said quietly, and some build them on sand. Eventually, the tide comes in. Later that evening, Carter told me he'd heard through the legal grapevine what had happened to Victoria. After the divorce, where James had refused to take a penny more than what was legally his, her parents had cut her off completely. She had tried to leverage what she knew about Alexander Reeves, but it backfired spectacularly. His own powerful family closed ranks around him, painting her as an unstable, scorned woman trying to extort him. She had lost her reputation, her money, and her power. The last he'd heard, she had moved to a small town in a different state, changed her last name, and was living a quiet, anonymous life. The very thing she had feared most, being ordinary. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, not even a flicker of interest. She was just a ghost from a past life, a story that was no longer mine to tell. After everyone had left and the house was quiet, Sienna and I were cleaning up in the kitchen, stacking plates in comfortable silence. She put her arms around me from behind as I stood at the sink, resting her head on my back. "You okay?" she whispered. I turned around, drying my hands and pulling her close. "I'm better than okay." I looked around my home, at the evidence of a life filled with genuine warmth and real connection. The real victory wasn't watching Victoria fall. It wasn't getting the bigger investment or even getting the apology. The real victory was this peace, this quiet, unshakable sense of self, solid as the ground beneath my feet. For years, I had been begging for a seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. I thought that was what I wanted, what defined success. But I was wrong. The journey through that fire taught me the most important lesson of my life. You can't demand respect from others until you have it for yourself. And true freedom isn't about being accepted into someone else's world. It's about having the courage to build your own. And as I stood there with the woman I loved, in a home filled with light, I knew, for the first time, that I was finally truly free. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up for yourself against the people who were supposed to be on your side? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.
And also, I need to say a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I would not be here without you and all of your great support. See you next time.